Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you will proceed to your seats, we're going to get started in about 3 minutes. Wow. Oh, that's nice. Okay. About 3 minutes. Kayla Bear. Kayla Bear. Turn me back down. It was. Kayla Bear. I'm going to walk over here so I can see the clock. Oh, it's 8:30. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to our first annual Founders Teachers Conference. It's great to see you all. We just had 2 weeks of ATI training for new teachers, and we had about 120 teachers there. And it was very exciting to see everybody, and there were lots of smiles and happy conversations, and everybody seemed very eager among our new teachers. So we're glad to see you all, and hopefully you will have the same energy over the next couple of days. My name is Mike Terry. I'm the superintendent of Founders Classical Academies. Now, we had approximately 180 teachers with us, both in person and remote, at our, again, our new teachers conference. And Melanie Sharpless, we have approximately how many today? Okay, so we've hundreds of teachers, and one of the things that's an indication of is our growth. You may not be aware, but Founders has grown over the last 10 years, starting with Founders Louisville. Good morning, Dr. Moore. I'm actually going to address your contribution to what we've done here. We'll have an opportunity to introduce Dr. Moore a little later on. But 10 years ago, when Hillsdale College announced that they were going to start this charter classical initiative, Chuck Cook, our CEO, jumped at the opportunity. It was something that he felt would meet a need in North Texas and then around the state. And so 10 years ago, we launched Founders Louisville. Jason Karras was our first headmaster, and in that time, our brand, and it's happened in different ways, but this year, we're going to have 18 campuses in Texas and Arkansas with 10,000 students. That is, and just think about that. I mean, you can applaud or whatever. It's not really an applause line, but it's more of an acknowledgement of what that early group at Hillsdale had, and I could imagine would happen. What our friends at Ridgeview in Colorado and in other schools around the country had already thought about starting this classical movement within the public school space has grown to. I mean, it's amazing. When we're in the process of getting a number of new campuses open this fall. We've got our Prosper campus that we're very excited about, and we have 700 kids roughly and 1,000 plus on our wait lists, and those wait lists are pretty typical, whether it's here or at Leander, at Frisco, at Louisville, at Flower Mound. These established campuses are drawing people to them, and so that's a confirmation to me that a knowledge-rich curriculum where we're focused on the development of virtue, so that we will have responsible young people going out into the world and leading prosperous lives. I think is being proven out. So I'm glad that you all are here today. Now, I want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about our theme and what we're going to try to accomplish over the next 2 days. And then I'm going to hand it over to the person that's getting this all done, who's Melanie Sharpless. She's also received a lot of help from Brooks McDonald. So, Brooks, I don't know where you are. I don't even know if you're... Oh, she's back there behind the door. What are you doing back there? You're watching me live. Very good. So I asked them in the spring if they would consider putting together a time for us to think about our craft, think about both the science of teaching, but also the art of it. And we talked a lot about what we wanted to be focused on during this time. And one of the criticisms of classical education over the years, and really over the centuries, is that it's rigid, that it's confined, that it is a discipline of the mind and nothing else. And I don't think that's fair. It may be in certain contexts that's what it had become, but we want this also to be endeavor of the heart. And so we're going to be talking a bit about the cultivation of wonder and discovery and joy, and that is a process that our students should be going through. They get to the point where they learn because they want to learn, not because you're driving them forward. And you'll be moving them forward, certainly, and in your classrooms, but we want them to love learning. And so this is the theme that we're going to be digging into a little bit with our various presenters. I did want to say, as a kind of matter of process, that as you go into your various sessions, our quarantine procedures are still in place, and so it's really important that you know who's sitting around you, mostly so that you know who's sitting around you, and that you're talking to them, and that you're knowing and getting to know their name. But we still have to be cognizant of COVID and know that if people get sick, that we have to proceed according to procedure. Now, 2 weeks of having 120 people over at Founders Louisville for ATI, we only had one case, and I think 4 teachers were quarantined. So I'm not terribly worried about it, and given the fact that you're all sitting next to each other, it doesn't look like you are either. But I just want you to be aware that we're still going to be dealing with that a little bit this year. So just be saying hello to the people sitting next to you, and be sure that you're getting to know who they are for their own sake and not necessarily for process. So at this time, I would like Melanie Sharpless to come up and tell us what's next, and then we'll welcome our first speaker. So thank you to the person who has put all this together, Melanie Sharpless.
Good morning. As Mike said, my name is Melanie Sharpless. I am a regional director for Founders Classical Academy, and then also kind of leading Bastrop and Shirts. Opened Frisco with an amazing team who are all here. I'm just going to walk you through a few business items today. So in your folder, so you may want to open along with me. The first thing you're going to see is an agenda. So the way that this works is in the morning, we'll start with a big plenary session all in this room. Then you will go to a breakout session of your choosing, 10:15, lunch, then another breakout session of your choosing, and then come back in here for us to finish the day. So we did not have you sign up or register for those breakout sessions. Just pick the one you want to go to. If you get there and it's full, then you need to go to somewhere else. The great news is we are repeating the exact same schedule on the breakout sessions today and tomorrow. So if there's a session you didn't get to see today, then you have a second opportunity to do that tomorrow. So one of the great things about conferences like this is the chance to network and get to know other people. So today and tomorrow, you are sitting with people in your lunchroom. You're going to see a sheet like this. It says networking lunch, and it's going to tell you what rooms you go in. So if you teach kindergarten, then you're going to get to meet other kindergarten teachers from other founders around. And our hope is that you guys start to develop relationships so you can connect with each other, lean on each other, all of that during the year. So we wanted to make sure that you see that. If you are upstairs, the food will be upstairs. If you are downstairs, the food will be downstairs. The only exception to that is if you are vegan, vegetarian, or gluten-free. All of that is downstairs, so you'll have to get your food and then go upstairs if you're seated there. So every day you must sign in. We actually primarily need that to prove to the state that you were here, so we fed you and we paid for that. So make sure you sign in tomorrow. You have to come in and sign in again, get a name tag, all of that. We have some amazing volunteers from various campuses, Frisco, Prosper, Corinth, Carrollton, parent volunteers who are here. They're in the blue shirts. So if you need anything, please do not hesitate to go to one of them and ask. I also just really, and I'll probably do this several times over the next couple of days, thank Hope Fellowship. Pastor Robert Jordan, he's probably not in here. Robert, are you in here? He is, oh. So he's in the back. Wave, Robert, wave, there you go. He has been so gracious and allowed us this facility to use free of charge. So I just want to say thank you with a round of applause. Thank Hope Fellowship for that. He also loves this education. His kids go to Founders Frisco, so that's been great. So just be aware that we are guests here. If you make a mess, clean it up. That's just all we're asking. All those things that you say to your students every day, 15,000 times, let's just do the same here. So, and finally, I'd like everyone to silence their cell phones. Make sure you remember to do that. See a few people reaching for those. So it's been a little bit of a crazy week trying to get ready for this thing. We actually had 3 out of our 4 plenary speakers get sick, one with COVID, and one we found out yesterday. So unfortunately, Dr. Christopher Perrin will not be here with us today. He is at home sick, although he did promise me he will speak at our 2nd annual Founders Teachers Conference, so we'll have him there. So, as you can imagine, I was sitting in my hotel room thinking, oh my goodness, you know, I don't have anything prepared, so let's just, what am I to do? So I thought, I'm gonna call my good friend, Heather Brown. So, Heather is the new headmaster with RES, and she is opening up the Prosper campus. So she has a great topic that will apply to any teacher of any age, which is igniting the moral imagination. Heather has over 30 years experience in education. She's previously been she's taught almost everything from kinder through 8 in history and literature. And for the last 12 years, she has been in California and opened and overseen 3 large charter schools. She has been married for 30 years, has 3 children, and is a granny, just became about 6 or 7 months ago. So to a beautiful, beautiful baby girl. So she was going to speak in one of the breakout sessions, So you can X her from that. I'm not going to make her do the breakout session and talk in here. So she was in an afternoon breakout session, but really, I just so appreciate her being willing to step up this morning. So Heather, come on up. It's Heather Brown, everyone. When Heather is done, you guys can, just it's over, gather your things, go grab coffee, water, restroom, and then head to your first breakout session. So thanks. Okay.
Well, that was fun to hear Melanie's thought process, as she didn't consider herself for this task, but me. So thanks, Melanie. And I am so honored and thankful to be here today. I have to say I was really disappointed that you all didn't get to hear from Dr. Perrin. I've spent a lot of years studying things that he has shared. He is a wonderful resource. And so although he's not here today, I encourage you to look him up. Watch some of his videos, read some of his materials, because a lot of who I am as a classical educator has come from the teachings of Dr. Perrin, and so I encourage you to visit his website and learn a little bit about him. Well, I am thrilled to be sharing with you all this morning, and I appreciate the kind and generous welcome, especially from my cheering committee. We're not biased, but Prosper's great. We're so excited. I have a phenomenal staff, and I'm so thankful that you are here. Well, as any good teacher knows, when you begin a lesson, you get to know your audience and you get everybody moving. And so my hope is that your coffee has taken root and you're ready to go this morning, but it's important for me to know a little bit about who you are. So we're just gonna do a quick activity. When I call out a category that you fit into, I would love for you just to stand up. And part of this is selfish because I want to know who I'm talking to. But part of this is for you because as we stand and as we realize who is in this room today, it gives you the opportunity to spy out who your resources are, right? And to get to know the people in the room because these people are walking this journey with you. And they're going to face or may have already faced some of the same challenges you're going to face. And I'm sure that they've fallen in some holes that they'd love to help you avoid. And they also have had some amazing successes and stories to tell. And then the new teachers in this room have a joy and a vigor and an energy that some of us old folks maybe struggle with later on in our career. And we have a lot to learn from you as you bring a fresh perspective and joy and excitement to what we do here at Founders Classical. So as we participate in this activity, look around and get to know the people around you. So let's just begin by having anyone who is an elementary school teacher. Can you stand? Great. All right, have a seat. How about if you teach middle school, the brave, the few, the proud? Middle school is an amazing time. Thank you so much for your service to our prepubescent and pubescent children. And then if you teach high school, could you stand up, please? I love this, and I love to see where our students are going. You are their future as they move through our schools. Thank you. If this is your first year with Founders, will you stand, please? Welcome. We're so excited to have you. All right, if you've been with us for 5 years or less, will you stand? Wow, these are your resources. Look around. All right, and then if you've been with us for more than 5 years. Great, thank you. All right, and then there's the few and tired administrators. If you are an administrative or above role at the school, can you please stand? I know we have you here. Thank you. And then finally, I know we have at least one here. If you are a visitor to Founders Classical, is there anyone here who's a visitor and just here to spy on us and see what we're all about? We have a few guys in the back who are doing our sound. Well, welcome, and we're so excited that you are here and part of today. I'm going to ask you another question in a minute, but it's a hand-raising question so as not to sort of make you feel uncomfortable or pull you out of your comfort zone. But I am going to share today a little bit about the idea of igniting the moral imagination. Think about that phrase for a minute. The moral imagination is a phrase that was relatively new to me. And for someone who had been in classical education classical education for about 13 years, I was surprised when I heard this term and didn't know what it was. But the truth is, I had been actively participating in moral imagination since I was a young child. I just didn't know it, and it didn't have a name. As a little one, I loved to read, and I was that girl who loved a great fairy story. I loved the heroes, the romance, maybe a little too early in life. The idea of a hero, the idea of talking to animals, that they were your best friends. The idea that in the end, something magical could happen. And I was engaged in the activity of moral imagination even as a little child, but I didn't know. And a few years ago, I went to a conference in Minnesota that was, the keynote speaker was a gentleman who's become a good friend of mine, Dr. Daniel Copeland. You might recognize his name. He's a professor at Hillsdale, and he teaches education classes for teachers who are training to be educators, and he teaches children literature classes. He's been head of the literature department, and he also is the co-author of the Writing and the Well-Ordered Language, program that we use to teach grammar to our upper elementary and middle school students. And I'm sitting in this session so excited to hear from my good friend, Dr. Copeland, and he puts up this idea of moral imagination. And I had two emotions as I listened to him talk, or realizations. And one of them was this sense of joy and excitement, because I was so excited about what this idea was and what it meant for the children in my classroom and for my teachers and for my own children at home. And then my other feeling or emotion or realization was one of a little bit of sadness, because I realized that although this idea of moral imagination was something I'd experienced my whole life, and some of it was natural to me in my teaching, I had missed opportunity after opportunity to be intentional in using this in my classroom. And so I sat there as someone who was new to this idea in practice and pedagogy, and from that moment on, it has become a huge passion of mine, and that's why I'm so excited to share it with you today. And so I'm going to ask you to be a little bit vulnerable and honest with me, but I want to know who's joining me those few years ago as I sat in that chair and hadn't heard of this. Raise your hand if this is something that's a new idea to you, that you might not fully understand. You don't know what this means. Thank you for your authenticity and honesty. I appreciate that, and I've been there. And I hope that as we finish today, you not only have a sense and idea about what moral imagination is, but hopefully you've developed a passion like I have to really implement it into your pedagogy and allow it to penetrate not only your classroom, but who you are. I was talking with my dean of upper school, Mr. Reed, this morning as we were walking in, and he said something that struck me at how he felt inspired by being here this morning. And I thought about many of you who are coming to us for the first time, or even with Founders, this is the first classical conference that they've held. I think this feels different than a lot of teachers in services I've been to. There's something about today that feels special. You're being well taken care of with a great packet and a beautiful lunch. You're being encouraged to get to know other people. But what I think is one of the key differences in what we're doing today is we're not just telling you what page to start math on the first Tuesday of the year. And we're not telling you to get through your scope and sequence by a certain date so we can ensure that your kids are well prepared for the test that we're giving on the final Friday in March. But what we're talking about is something that not only will change your classroom, but most likely will impact you and who you are as an educator, as a mom or a dad or a sister or a brother or a best friend. And that's what our hope is today. that we not only challenge and encourage you to inspire wonder and joy and creativity and discovery and imagination in your classroom, but that we ignite it in you. Because the authenticity and beauty of something that's happening inside you in the classroom is far more powerful than any Venn diagram that you have the children fill out. And so I hope today, as we journey through this conference, that you're not only thinking about classroom practices, but you're thinking about yourself and what this means for you, and as you develop and as you become as a teacher at Founders Classical Academies. And so we're going to jump into this topic of igniting the moral imagination. I love this quote from an American author that says, "A story is a way to say something that can't be said any other way. You tell a story because a statement would be inadequate." I think this is so profound for me because it makes me think instantly of children, and not just the little ones that are cute with their bows and their uniforms, but the big ones that are gangly and sometimes smelly after PE. Because I have seen time and time again that telling a child a story is so much more impactful than just giving them a statement. We see this all through history. We see this in the story, the allegory of the cave, the idea that a story is told that creates images and visuals, right? From Charlotte's Web to Treasure Island to Romeo and Juliet. Stories tell things in a profound manner. Even Jesus used it in parables to give examples. Aesop's fables are beautiful ways to tell stories that create ideas in children's minds where statements would simply be inadequate. So let's define moral imagination before we go any further. Moral imagination is not a thing, not even so much a faculty, as the very process by which the self makes metaphors out of images given by experience and then employs these metaphors to find and suppose moral correspondences in experience. The author of this book, Tending the Heart of Virtue, wrote this statement. And I use this book a lot in my sharing with you today, in my personal journey to understanding moral imagination. And I encourage you, if you haven't read it, and I know some of you were assigned to read it by your headmasters over the summer, and if you haven't read it yet, please go home and read it, not just because it was your summer homework, but because it's so valuable as you begin to understand this idea of moral imagination. I want to tell a story that Dr. Copeland told, and I did borrow it from him, and he is aware that I will share it on occasion, that beautifully illustrates the idea of moral imagination from this sort of philosophical definition to a real-life understanding. Dr. Copeland has a few children, and he has studied C.S. Lewis for years. He's even studied in Cambridge, and he knows Narnia like the back of his hand, and he loves Narnia. And his children were reading Narnia as a family, and he had a child, his son, that I believe was early middle school, and he has some sisters. And his son was beginning to participate in that, middle schoolish activity of being a pesky brother and just poking at his sisters and making some bad decisions. And so at one point it escalated to where Dr. Copeland had to send him to his room. And he sent his son to his room, and in the time period while his son was in the room awaiting his punishment, right, which all parents and teachers, we know, we give him that think time, right? The longer the better, right? So that fear kind of can stir up in their tummies and they can think a little bit about what they've done. But he did this, and while he was doing this, Dr. Copeland was preparing a lovely speech for his son. He was going to outline the consequences, the 8 reasons why his behavior was inappropriate, and the consequences of such, and then they'd come to a decision together on the best possible disciplinary action. And so he goes in and he begins his speech to his son. And I'm going to pause for a second because as a mom and a teacher, I've done this very thing. And I think I see heads shaking yes, right? And you're so proud of what you're about to say, right? You know it's like the 8-point, it's like in church where they're giving you the outline, right? You got the whole thing. You're ready to go with the zinger at the end. And he said he'd prepared and he went in and he gave this beautiful speech to his son. And he said he just had this like glazed over look, right? Kind of, it wasn't getting in. And out of exasperation and frustration, he just looked at him and he said, "You're being an Edmund." You laugh. That's your moral imagination right there. Because you see, his son knew Edmund. And anyone who's read Narnia knows you don't want to be Edmund. Lucy, maybe. Peter, of course. Edmund? No way. I'd be Mrs. Beaver over him any day, right? Because you know his behavior. You've seen it. You've seen the consequences. You've seen the hurt. In some cases, you've even been in his mind because you've heard his thought process as you've read stories. And you've seen the damage of the choices he made. You've also seen the redemption at the other end. And Dr. Copeland said in that moment, it was evident and clear to him that no amount of talking to his child would be as impactful as drawing the connection between Edmund and his behavior. That is the beauty of the moral imagination. And so I want you to think for a minute if there's a time that that's ever happened to you or in your life. Have you ever had an opportunity to come face to face with maybe something you've done or your children have done or your class has done, and you can relate it beautifully to a story you've read? I mentioned earlier Aesop's fables. Those are easy, right? Because they pretty much tell you the moral of the story is. And so it's written out really explicitly for you, and yet it's beautiful, and it's impactful, and it's profound. I, as a teacher, had a moment when I was teaching Treasure Island to fourth graders. I love to pick a book that's swashbuckling and that the boys can get so excited about, and those girls get their adventurous spirit ignited. And there's a point where little Jim Hawkins sees the gold from the pirate. And he knows that his mom is owed money because the pirate's been staying in her inn. And he knows that no one's looking. And he could take that money and he could give it to his mom and pay what she was owed. That seems like a good moral decision, doesn't it? Especially if you're 9 or 10 years old. It seems just and right. But it's also stealing. And the young boy makes the decision to not steal the gold. He does the right thing. I told this story in my class. We had a beautiful conversation. We talked about the golden mean. It was very philosophical. I felt great about my lesson. And I didn't think much of it before I'd been introduced to moral imagination. And then a few weeks later, I had a student in my class who was one who believed that if something was on the floor, it was his. It was his. No one had it. It wasn't theirs. I can have it, Mrs. Brown. There's no name on it. And so this little guy, Scott, would pick up stuff and take it all the time, and we'd have often a conversation about that. And at one point, a few weeks after we told that story, he came to me and he said, "Mrs. Brown, I need to return this item that I found." And I was shocked, because typically I had to go digging through Scott's backpack to find the lost items. And he said, "Yeah, kind of like Jim Hawkins, I think I need to give it back." And I thought, oh, he learned a beautiful lesson. I'm so proud. But then after I'd heard about this idea of moral imagination, I remembered that story. And I thought, wow, I missed an opportunity. How much smarter or more intuitive is that child than I was? Because I could have talked so much more about the beauty of the truth and doing the right thing in that moment. And instead, I moved on, and we probably talked about plot and story development and key characters, and yeah, he did a good thing. But that child was changed by a story. That is what igniting the moral imagination can do. I like this quote as well from Alistair McIntyre, who is a philosopher of moral and political philosophy, and he says, "It is through hearing stories about wicked stepmothers, lost children, good but misguided kings, wolves that suckle twin boys, youngest sons who receive no inheritance but must make their own way in the world, and eldest sons who waste their inheritance. That children learn or mislearn both what a child and what a parent is, what the cast of characters may be in the drama into which they have been born, and what the ways of the world are. Here's your warning. Deprive children of stories, and you leave them unscripted, anxious stutterers in their actions as in their words. That hit me profoundly when I read that last sentence, and I saw it as a warning, and I hope you see it that way too. Because I look at some of our students who come to us, and in generosity of heart, I don't think I want to go as far as the strong words that it says about these young children that come to us, that they're unscripted and anxious stutterers. But that's often what we see, isn't it? They can't control themselves or their bodies or their emotions or their thoughts. They can't focus. Their parents might struggle with those same character traits or qualities. Igniting the moral imagination allows us the opportunity to guide and cultivate things in these children that they might not experience anywhere else. In fact, the moral imagination must be tended, awakened, exercised, cultivated, and ignited. I love these descriptive words, and I love as a teacher and an educator and a mom and a wife and a human to apply these words to my actions and what I do day in and day out. And that's why, again, I want to help you think about or remind you to consider how these things you hear the next 2 days impact you, not just your classroom. I also love these words because there's a kindness and love behind them, right? When you cultivate something, it's not forced upon, it's not thrust upon you. If you look at the root of the word educate, it takes you back to the idea to pour out or pour into, right? You cultivate a plant. I love this image of the flowers just bursting through this book. And so as we approach the next few days and you're thinking about wonder and joy and discovery and curiosity, think about how you can tend, awaken, cultivate, exercise, and ignite those things in your classroom and in your students. I also want to draw to your attention the idea that when we do these things, we have engagement, right? I mean, isn't that one of the top boxes on your teacher evaluation or when you're going through your T-tests, right? Were the scholars and students engaged, right? When you're cultivating them and tending them, when you're reading stories about kings and queens and twins that suckle. These are stories that are engaging and exciting and scary and adventurous, and they do engage. I want you to think about maybe a time that this has even happened to you, that someone's taken the time to tend or cultivate in you, and what that felt like, and what that did for you, and how that shaped you. I also think that at times we get stuck in this idea of reality. And sometimes reality shows or reality steals the flame or the excitement or the joy. And so hopefully you'll plant this image of these beautiful flowers coming out of this book as you approach your planning and preparing for your students. For us, there's another level to this and another layer. And that is our mission. I didn't share this earlier, but about 5 or 6 years ago, I can't remember, I'm old and sometimes have a hard time with math. Sorry, math teachers. But I was able to come visit Responsive Education Solutions from my charter school that I was working at in California. And I came and I visited, and I was in a conference with Chuck Cook, our founder, and Mr. Terry, and a few other people from Founders Classical, as well as classical educators from across the country. And I spent 2 days, I toured Founders in Louisville, and just sat at the table and ate meals. And I went home and I told my husband, I said, I need to be part of this. They're doing something amazing. Now, the work I was doing in California was important, and it was valuable, and it was impactful. But something drew me here. This is what drew me here. And a way was made, and I am so thankful and blessed and honored to be a part of Founders and to be here finally. It took a while, but I'm so thankful. But this is why I'm here. Because the mission here is to provide hope for students through educational options that promote a free society and cultivate moral and academic excellence. And there's even another vision and mission that talks about classical education, but Responsive Ed as a whole, through all of their brands and all of the children that they impact and reach, want to provide hope, but not empty hope. We're not just giving kids hope for college, or hope for an A in chemistry, or hope for a job. But we want to promote free society and cultivate moral and academic excellence. And that's what the moral imagination does. It cultivates moral excellence. That's why I'm here. And I want you to take a minute and think about, why are you here? My hope, our hope is, as leaders of these schools, is that you are here for this reason too. And if you have questions about this, or you're trying to still get your head around this, that's what these 2 days are for. That's what the people in this room are here to help you with. That's what we want to fill you with and cultivate in you, is the ability to provide hope through moral excellence. I want to read a passage from this book for you, but first I want to kind of wrap it in this phrase. A central purpose of reading literature is ethical, in that great stories teach us what it means to be genuinely human. Literature and stories give us a glimpse into who we truly are. There's no filter. When we read the story of Narnia, we know exactly what Lucy is thinking and feeling and smelling and seeing and wrestling with. We hear her thoughts, we see them process, and we know their hearts. Isn't that a beautiful thing? In real life, we don't do that, right? We hide, typically. Authenticity is not common. And so very often we hide who we are, and we don't let people see. But how exciting is it if children can do that in the pages of the book? Let me read you this quote from Tending the Heart of Virtue that I just love. It's talking about fairy tales. Fairy tales and fantasy stories transport the reader into other worlds that are fresh with wonder, surprise, and danger. They challenge the reader to make sense of those other worlds, to navigate his way through them, and to imagine himself in the place of the heroes and heroines who populate those worlds. The safety and assurance of these imaginative adventures is that risks can be taken without having to endure all of the consequences of failure. The joy is in discovering how these risky adventures might eventuate in satisfactory and happy outcomes. Yet the concept of self is also transformed. The images and metaphors in these stories stay with the reader, even after they've returned to the real world. Do you have a story that stayed with you, that shaped or changed how you think, that has helped you understand how not only yourself, but the people around you are human, the mistakes they make, the struggles they have, the dragons they conquer. I love that. So what does this mean for you in the classroom? And I want to stop for a minute and make sure that everyone knows that this is not just for teachers of literature. There are stories of math and science, of biology, of history that can capture and ignite the moral imagination. But we as teachers and facilitators and cultivators are tasked with this. And so I want you to think about some practical ways that you can apply this in your classroom and even in your own lives. First, choose the best stories. There is some garbage out there. And the scary part about moral imagination is it can be used for good or evil. If we read stories to our students that show the antithesis of good without a redeeming quality, or without as teachers pointing out that, we can actually lead them down a very scary path. And so I ask you to use your power for good in choosing the very best stories. For the littles, it's stories where it's explicit and clear. Subtlety is not really effective in kindergarten. But as they get older, the subtlety is important because they're going to experience it in real life. And so sometimes they have to think hard about the morality and the choices. And they have to look deeply into the characters to see the decisions that they're making. My biggest mistake, and maybe you can join me in this, is that I wasn't always intentional. I looked at the book, and sometimes I didn't look for or harvest those moments where I could ignite the moral imagination, or bring them to it, or push it along, or talk about it, or reflect on it. So being intentional is so important. Time and place is also critical. When you're studying in 3rd grade, Greek and Rome, study Romulus and Remus. It's the perfect fit. It fits with what you're doing in the classroom, and it helps them understand the moral and ethical struggles that the characters hundreds or thousands of years ago experienced. And I bet theirs are a little bit the same. Maybe not a dragon or a wolf. But the key underlying morality struggles and challenges and questions are the same. Goodness, truth, and beauty. You hear this so often in classical education. We love the good, the true, and the beautiful, the transcendentals. These are important to us. But teach your students and give them the opportunity to love the good because it's good. And that doesn't just mean when we pick up a book. What in your classroom is good or true or beautiful? Is there a beautiful painting like the one I had earlier that ignites the moral imagination? Is there a song they can hear? Is there a historical place and time that they might experience? It doesn't have to be limited to literature. Classic books do not just tell us who we are, but who we should be, because we're given more than we are. Oh, I want the courage of Lucy. I want the grit of our dear friend, the Hobbit, or the loyalty of Sam. I want those things in my life, and how beautiful for me to see them played out in the pages of a story. But you can ignite a fire, or you can blow it out. And I don't know about you, but I have been an educator who has extinguished the fire before. And so just like that earlier warning we read about the students, I want to give you some warnings as well to consider. First, understand the difference between values and virtue. You hear us talk a lot about virtue here at Founders Classical Academy. Your school, I'm sure over the next few days as you go to your in-service, you'll talk about your virtues and what those look like in the classroom. They'll be posted probably. You might even have your students memorize them or recite them to anchor them to their hearts. But there's a difference between a value and a virtue, and it's important for us not only to know these in our practice of our virtues at Founders Classical, but in the literature and stories we read. Values are really collective moral beliefs, the values of a society. It's what we kind of hold dear as a community or a people. I will tell you, I've experienced a difference in values in the state of Texas versus the state of California. I've seen it. It's been evident. It's part of the reason I'm here. But values are still collective, something a group of people come together and agree upon, sort of a social contract. The challenge or the problem with that is they also become relative. And as the tide changes, often the values do as well. But virtues are different. Virtues stand the test of time. They define the ethical character of a person. It's described in the book, Tending the Heart of Virtue, by comparing a smoke ring to a stone. If someone blows out a smoke ring, you know it's a ring when it's puffed out, right? It holds its shape for a moment, gives off an aroma, but it begins to dissipate, doesn't it? And as it dissipates, it changes, and it's no longer a ring, but it's changed. But a stone is a stone is a stone. You can take that stone, you can heat it up, you can throw it in the bottom of a lake, you can skip it across a pond, you can throw it at your brother, but it's still a stone. It never changes. It continues with its value and its virtue. It remains steady. So consider as you're teaching your students that you're harvesting virtues, not relative values, and that your students begin to understand that. Current relevance. This is pop culture. This is what the world today deems important. And some of those things are important. But make sure that the things that you are highlighting, that you are bringing the students to cultivate and find and dig out in their literature to change their hearts, are things that aren't just about current events or the relevance of what's happening today in the media or across the world, but they're things that matter for the long haul. Lack of authenticity. This happens so often in classical education, and this isn't a criticism, this is a noticing. We get so used to saying things like good, truth, and beauty. These are our values: honor, respect, perseverance, temperance. That sometimes they lose their heart. And I think that's one of the most important parts about igniting the moral imagination, is you take that idea, that virtue, that important thing that you want your students to embody, and you give it authenticity. So it's not just something that Mrs. Brown says when I'm not working hard. You're not persevering with your algebra. It's not something I throw on them or to their parents when I say, well, they're really not exhibiting our values and virtues here at our school. But the moral imagination allows the child to give authenticity to those things that we hold dear. Don't take that away. Make sure it matters. And one of the best ways to do that is through literature and through ourselves. Be honest, be true. When you talk about the boy struggling in Treasure Island, little Jim, who wanted to steal the gold, maybe you tell a story of when you stole the gold. Help them make that connection from literature to real life, and let them know that you are genuinely human as well. Let their parents know. I've struggled with this too. That'll launch your parent relationship into trust faster than any phone call about a lack of virtue will. The schedule. Oh, the beastly schedule. The bell's going to ring. They've got to go to recess. We have to stop reading the story, and we're not going to talk about or explore or come back to that beautiful thing that just happened in the pages of this book. Don't let the schedule run you over. Now, we're an organization that have to let the children out on time. They need to be able to use the restroom and go to lunch, and you can't just sit on the floor and read The Secret Garden for 5 hours. I understand that. But sometimes those moments are good, and let them happen. And maybe you cut the math lesson short tomorrow. Or maybe you dig a little deeper into history the next day. That's okay. Because there's moments that things are happening and the schedule can take over your classroom, and so you miss those treasures that you need to mine. The easy answer, right? What was Jim Hawkins wearing when he found the treasure? Blue pants and a pirate hat. Great. Check that box. No. Don't do the easy answer. And even when a child gives you an answer, or you think of an answer, go one step further. Ask one more question. Push just that much harder. Because it's not about getting the right answer. It's about cultivating morality. It's about providing hope. It's about inspiring wonder. It's not about his motive in a two-word answer as to why he made the decision he did. Think about asking the question, why was Sam such a good friend of Frodo? There's so many answers. It's so rich and so deep. Don't just accept the easy answer in your children or yourself. This one is the hardest one for so many teachers of literature, whether it be the kindergartners or the seniors in high school. Teaching the mechanics and structure, right? Kindergartners, this is a book, here's the binding. What do we call the person that draws the pictures? It's the illustrator, right? As we get into high school and more complex literature, we're talking about things like plot and inference and foreshadowing. Those things are important to know, don't get me wrong. It's important that students and children understand those things. But mechanics and structure often get in the way. If I'm so busy charting my climax and my resolution that I miss all the good stuff in the middle. Don't fall into that trap. Find that balance. And I think I can speak for all the administrators in this room, but if I'm wrong, just tell your teachers when you get them back to yourself. But I will tell you at least specifically for the Prosper teachers. I would much rather you have a slighter understanding of the plot or the character development. If that means that your children have a rich and deep understanding of the morality of a character or the consequences of their choices, or it's changed who they want to be as a man or a woman, who one day will step into a voting booth or raise a child of their own or run a company or write a speeding ticket. That's what we're doing here. And that's what promotes and brings on a strong, educated, moral, free society. And then the other danger of classical education is the idea of when rigor becomes rigor mortis, right? High school teachers, you don't have to raise your hand on this one, but assigning 85 pages of Plato's Republic for Tuesday night homework is rigor that can quickly squash the life out of any high school junior or senior. That's rigor mortis. It's difficult, and it sucks the life out of you, and all you do is go through the motions. Classical education should be delightful. Don't let it become dead. And then again, don't miss that moment. Find it, capture it, capitalize on it, dance around with it, make it magic. Only a pedagogy that awakens and enlivens the moral imagination will persuade the child or student that courage is the ultimate test of good character, that honesty is essential for trust and harmony among persons, and that humility and a magnanimous spirit are goods greater than prizes won by selfishness, pride, or the unscrupulous exercise of power and position. Is that quote not a stark contrast to the world we live in today? To the media, to the people whose students are drawn to as their mentors and examples in their life. I challenge you to help your students see that contrast. And you can do it in a way that is uplifting and positive. But help them understand the difference between what is courageous, honest, and humble versus what is selfish and prideful and power-hungry. And then help them make the connection between who they want to be and the difference they want to make. And the beautiful thing is, it's in every story we read here. It is littered throughout the pages of the books. I don't know if you've looked at your reading list yet, but if you haven't, I invite you to do so. Because there's countless opportunities for you to ignite the moral imagination within your children. And as we're talking about contrast, I also want to encourage you that when you see something that you're not pleased with, like Dr. Copeland did, it's not the time to lecture your students. It's the time to gather them around and find a story. Maybe it isn't in the book you're reading right now, but I bet it's in a book we've got. And I know it's out there in the amazing libraries of literature and stories that we have available to us. If you can't find it, come find me. I'll help you find it, or your administrator. But if you see a trait in your class that's bothering you or in a child, tell them a story. Read to them. Discuss with them. Reflect with them. Set goals with them. So that not only is the moral imagination ignited, but it no longer is just a birthday candle, but it becomes a forest fire, which, by the way, is not an example I can use in California at this time. But think about it. The power of a forest fire to cleanse and purify and warm and change. That's what we're doing. You get to do that. It's beautiful. So what now? How will you be intentional with what you do? How will you spark wonder and joy and curiosity in your math classroom, in your physics classroom? Oh, the human body tells some amazing stories. In chemistry, in phonics, in the pages of history. How can you do that? How can you ignite wonder and joy and curiosity? And how will you be intentional? I neglected to point something out in the first slide, and I'm actually going to go all the way back to it when I'm done, because I want to draw your attention to the picture, but I also love this photograph. It's by my favorite artist. His name is Bob Brierly, and he paints pictures of children. But he also captures their imagination in the pictures of the children. And I love this picture of this little girl, and you can see her imagination just getting carried away with her, with the fairies and the joy and the excitement of the moment and of the book. That's what I want happening in the minds of our students: wonder, joy, and curiosity. And so I encourage you today, as we wind down and finish up, and you prepare to walk into the rest of your classes today and tomorrow, that you keep this at the front of your mind. And so as you're learning systems maybe and processes over the next few weeks and how to ensure that you're meeting those state standards, that none of those things steal the wonder and the joy and curiosity from you, so that you can then authentically bring it to your students. And so as we end today, I just ask you to be reflective. I'm going to go back all the way back to that first slide. This is called On My Way to School. And you see a little girl with her backpack, and she's ready to go. And yet you see all of the things that she will encounter: a dragon, a knight in shining armor, fairies, a princess, a handsome prince. That was always my favorite part. What are you igniting in your students and in yourself? And how is that going to change you and change them? Thank you. And I'll just briefly share with you, here's some resources. If you want to learn more, I'll leave this slide up for a few minutes and you can write down some of these resources for you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Heather. We appreciate that encouragement, and hopefully, where's Melanie? I don't know. Where is she? Oh, I see her. She's sitting back there going, what is he doing right now? I didn't tell him he could say anything. But that's my prerogative. If you were well, first of all, let me just say, and I think Heather brought this out, and I alluded to it at the beginning. We acknowledge that as teachers, there is a science of teaching, our methodologies, the way we approach certain topics, the scope and sequence, these things that help guide us on our way, these are really important. But then we have the art of teaching, which speaks to the heart. And if you're a math or science teacher here today, I hope you are having conversations about this. What are the stories that we need to talk about? This is not just the domain of the literature teacher, or even the history teacher for that matter, and history is full of stories. But all of you have a part to play to shine that light on the hearts of our students in whatever your subject is. And I'm not going to impart any advice to you at this moment if you were a math or science teacher, but I am going to challenge you when you have opportunities today and as you go back to your campuses to have this conversation. Because it's important. What teachers will ask me, I'll come into their classrooms and I'll observe them, and actually often their headmaster will ask me, well, what did you see and what did you see? What would you like to see? And I sometimes I'll say wonderful narratives in these classrooms, and other times I'll say, I'm getting a lot of dates and concepts and facts and puzzle pieces being put together in math, and that's great because that has a story to tell about order. But I didn't hear the thing that helped me know myself better, and that comes from the narrative, the story about the human experience. And so I do want to encourage all of you. I really appreciate what Heather had to say. I very much am grateful to her for stepping up and into the void. Dr. Moore doesn't know this, but I was thinking about it. He's a guest here, and I was thinking, well, maybe we'll have Dr. Moore come up and say a few things. And he's wiping his brow in relief. He flew in from Idaho. I did mention his name before. He was instrumental in getting the Founders Program started up some 10 years ago, and we'll have some, maybe down the road, have some opportunities to hear from them. But again, I encourage you to think about your discipline. Thank you for encouraging us, Heather, and by the way, I was just looking at the text you sent me in March of 2020. As I was sitting at dinner wondering what I was going to do about these new schools I was launching, she sent me a text, and she's like, you have anything I can do there in Texas? Well, as a matter of fact. So thank you for being here today. All right, we're ready for our break, and follow your schedules to get on to your next session. Thank you.